Tommy asked me twice before to give my testimony, and I both times planned to, but couldn't make it for whatever reason. This time I'm going to try, so I ask you to bear with me as I stumble through it. When I was young, my parents didn't go to church, but we were blessed to have a good Christian Baptist neighbor right down the road from us who came by each Sunday morning to pick up my older sister and myself and carried us to church. And later on, my parents joined us, so that was a blessing. In those days, of course, the Bible was taken a lot more seriously than it is today by many churches. You know, when you're young, you're impressed by a lot of things, and one of the things that impressed me so much was the fact that my mother had a placard on the mantle over our fireplace. It was royal blue. It's a beautiful thing. It had some glittering silver words on it that said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And that made a big impression on me, and many times I'd go through the room, I'd just stop and look at that, knowing what it meant, but still couldn't seem to take it all in. At age 11, I was baptized in a creek in the middle of a pasture while the congregation sang, "Shall we gather at the river?" So I know some of you older heads can maybe identify with that, and you young ones wonder what in the world that was about. But about that time, I had a cousin who was Catholic who came to visit us, and she said that she had to go to confession to get forgiveness for her sins. And I'd never heard of such a thing, because by that time I already knew that you had to go to Christ for forgiveness of your sins. And I pointed it out to her, but I guess she never believed me because she never left Catholicism. As I got older, I began to notice that on the calendar, the seventh day was the Sabbath. And so I would ask people, Sunday school teachers or just others that I knew, and sometimes pastors even when I got grown, why we didn't keep the seventh day. And I always got the same answer that many of you have gotten, and that is that because Christ arose on the first day of the week. And when I asked for scripture, I could never get it. But anyway, in later years, I took a job selling to stores in Mississippi and Alabama. And as I was driving, I loved to listen to Herbert W. Armstrong and later his son, Garner Ted Armstrong, who were members of the Worldwide Church of God. And they were very adamant that Saturday was the Sabbath. That was one of the better things that I got out of their program. And then I met a fellow named George Gager, who lived in Chunky and who was a literature evangelist. I called porters, we called them in those days. And we talked quite a bit, and he came by and sold me some Bible books for my daughter, Bible story books. And so we visited quite often and discussed religion. A friend of mine who had converted to Catholicism sent a Catholic priest by to see me. It was kind of an uncomfortable situation because I already knew enough to know that I wasn't all that happy with what they believed, but he left me a book of catechism and called Father Smith Instructs Jackson. And I did read some of the book enough to know that I couldn't believe that people could believe what was in that book, not if they read their Bibles. But anyway, I'm not down in the Catholics. I'm just saying that I don't agree with their doctrines at all, and I don't agree with their leadership. But anyway, I always kept this book in a particular place in the closet, and my wife knew where it was. She'd seen me get it many times. Sometimes she'd pick it up and read it. It always went back to the same place. Well, this priest moved, and he came by the house to get his book that he had lent me. Well, she looked all through the closet. She put her hand on it, around it, and everywhere else, and couldn't find it. So it blew her mind. And when I got home and showed her, that's right where it always been. So we kind of wondered what that was all about, but I later used it for a witnessing tool about some of the things that we just talked about. And about this time, Pine Forest Academy personnel were witnessing in Chunky periodically, and I met Mr. Emil Messinger, who was a Bible instructor down at Pine Forest. He visited me frequently, and since I was home only on the weekend, he usually came on Sabbath afternoons when I was watching the football game. And I didn't appreciate that. He would drive up just as some team was about to score, and I'd say, "Oh no, there's that old man from Pine Forest." And sometimes I wasn't all that friendly to him, but I always invited him in. I couldn't help but do that. And I later apologized to him, and he claimed that, he didn't notice because he persevered. He kept coming back, and I'm thankful now that he did. And then my family and I started visiting the Meridian church, and then several members of the church started visiting us, as some of you well remember, buddy. And I eventually decided to get baptized in this church, but it took me about 10 years to make that decision. I knew all the time it was right, but I was trying my best to fight it and just didn't want to give up some things. And when I finally decided to get baptized, I had to leave on Monday morning before I was to get baptized the following weekend, and I was reading my Bible as I always did every morning, and I came across something about burning forever. And even though I had studied the beliefs of the church and knew them full well, Satan just blindsided me real hard. It's just like, you've been fooled. This is what it really means. So I went tearing out down to Pine Forest and looked up Mr. Messenger and told him, I said, if I've been fooled on this, I've been fooled probably on other things, and I need somebody to show me where I'm wrong. And he did. He showed me what forever really meant in the Bible. And that old man was a real blessing to me, and I'm thankful that he was so faithful. And that was the days when it was still, forgive the word, kosher to visit and to witness. Apparently we've, including myself, have forgotten that. Anyway, I went forward with my baptism, and I enjoyed a time of spiritual peace, and I was amazed at how much study material this church has. I just couldn't believe that we had this much, and I couldn't see any reason why I should ever have to go outside this church again to get any material to read or study, because it was right here. And I'm not saying that all of the other study materials were wrong. Some of them were, as we know, but some of them were right on the subject that they were presenting. The process of sanctification can be and has been hard on me because Satan never lets up. But I intend to endure to the end. And I can take solace in knowing that as long as Satan's troubling me, he knows that he don't have me. And in spite of all my imperfections, I belong to Jesus Christ and the Father. And although many of you have heard the following quote, it bears repeating. There's nothing that we can do to make God love us more, and there's nothing that we can do to make God love us less. May God bless each of you. Thank you.
When Mr. Tommy asked me to give my testimony, I didn't have any problem, saying yes. I'd never been asked that before, but the one thing I thought was kind of funny is, me only being 17 years old, it's going to be kind of a short story, so I kind of wanted to focus the majority of what I was going to talk about, kind of just current things. But I was born and raised in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, this church in Meridian, originally the one on North Hills. I remember, going to the cradle roll class and then going all the way up to the primary, and then once I got to the teens, it was at this church. So I had two parents that were in church with me and that raised me up right, so I'm very thankful for that. I don't remember the exact date, but I do remember there's a picture on the refrigerator in my house being baptized by Pastor Carlos at the old church. I'm sure my mom could tell me the actual date and how old I was, but I really don't remember that. But what I do remember was I was at teen camp at Alamisco, June 22nd, 2011. I always remember that because it was my nephew's birthday. I wasn't there for his actual birthday. I was at camp, so it was a Saturday, and we were sitting there the Friday, the day before that at night, and we were sitting there with our camp counselor, and he was, just talking about us, different things that were happening in the week, and there's a little card, and it was just for each person at the table, and it had said, if you'd wanted to give your life to Jesus or rededicate it, I had been baptized, before whenever I was younger, but I just decided, that whenever I was little, I just kind of just made that, maybe not on necessarily pressure, but just, that I thought it was the right thing to do, so I wanted to rededicate my life to Jesus. So I had Pastor Will, that was, before he was a pastor at this church, but maybe the summer before, but he baptized me then. But what I really want to focus on today is just what God's been doing in my life, recently and this year and the year before. The first thing is, the beginning of this year, I spoke to my senior class, and I just really talked about how, at my school at Russell, the senior class is really highly looked upon the 11th grade and below, just the little kids, they really look at you. And I just really told the class that I wanted, us to be the leaders in the school and to be good examples, whether classes, before us had set a good example or not. I really wanted it not to be just one person, but a whole class that, was on fire for God and just, setting a good example for the kids. But I remember the very first time, I'd spoken to him 2 times, then I actually spoke in front of the whole upper, middle and high school at chapel. But the first time I talked to the class, I was so nervous. I'd never been really a good, speaker. I'd really tear up and choke up whenever I began to talk. But after that first time, I asked God, just help me to be calm and relaxed whenever I talk. And ever since then, I just really been able to just stand up and talk without any problems. But whenever I spoke to him, I'm sure you know the phrases. Whenever you want to do something for Jesus, it's a lot easier, to talk the talk than to walk the walk. But one of the verses, James 2:17 says, "Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." What I really wanted to stress to him, if you want to call yourself a Christian, you want to go to church and you want to live your life for God, it's a lot more than just standing up and like I did, just standing up in front of the class and telling them what we should do. It's a lot more than you have to, you want to be able to talk, but you also have to be able to walk. You have to put actions to your words. There's this movie that me and my mom watched, and eventually the rest of our family watched, and this quote just I love every time I think about it. It's this movie called What If. It's this guy that he made this decision whenever he was younger. He was going to go into the ministry, but he decided to go into business. And so it shows the movie at the very beginning, and he makes the decision. Then it goes a couple of years later, and he's a really rich, successful guy, but he really just totally lost his walk with Jesus. But he gets in kind of a little bit of car trouble, and he gets picked up by this older guy, and he's like a tow man, but he's actually an angel. But he tells the guy that, but he doesn't really believe him. But he gets put in a situation by God that it was called the Great What If. What if he had made the decision to go into the ministry? But there's this one quote, and this guy was really struggling. He was at one scene, he was a pastor in the church, and he wasn't prepared for the sermon that he had supposedly been preparing for. But he went to talk to the angel. He's like, how am I supposed to do this? And then the angel's like, do you want it the easy way or the hard way? So, he answered that, and the angel said, life boils down to one thing. Jesus loves you, so love other people. He goes on, he goes, Jesus, or God, sacrificed everything to be with you, so sacrifice everything. He goes, total surrender. The guy said, well, that's not simple. The angel said, it's simple, it's just hard. And with us, whenever we want to live our life for God and we want to put Him first in our life, it's simple, but the things in this world make it so hard. Our sinful nature, we want to sin. Satan doesn't tempt us with things that doesn't appeal to us. But another thing, it was 3 chapels in a row, 3 different speakers, but it really tied in together. The first one, he didn't really tell the story, but it was this young man and his wife had gotten in just a terrible accident. She was in the attic and she fell through the roof, and I think went all the way she fell through the ceiling, went all the way to the basement. I don't know exactly where, but it was this steel pole that just went, I don't know if it was her leg to her stomach, but it was just an awful accident. But God worked through that, and it missed every major artery and didn't, of course, it was painful, but she sat there, and when she went to the emergency room, she was perfectly fine. She had recovery, but nothing was injured to her. And then the principal, that was his daughter, and then the man who spoke before, that was his son-in-law. And he had just talked about amazing grace, and the one quote from it that I really like was, we see God's amazing grace through bad things that happen, in our life, but sometimes we forget, even through the good times, His grace is still amazing. Things happen around us that is out of our control, but what we can control is how we respond. The man who spoke first, he gave a good illustration. Say if something happens in our life, it's right over there, it's that pillar, but right here, we can't control it. I can't reach it. It doesn't affect me that I can't control it, but what I can control is right here, and that's how we respond. It's how we take it, and it's how we let God work through that. Jeremiah 29:11 says, that God has a plan for us. He knows our plan, that we may not know it, but everything that He has, planned out for us is going to work through good, whether we see it or not. I'll never understand why God allowed my dad to pass away. I may one day know, but not truly understand. But through those things, when you see that, God has a plan for you, God's amazing grace is through everything, whether it's good or bad. I know that God has a plan for me, and and that He'll take care of me. I can't control what goes around me, but I can control how I respond. The one verse that has really been my motto this year is 1 Corinthians 4:16. It says, "Therefore I urge you, imitate me." And that's Paul writing that, and it's Paul telling us to imitate him while he imitates Christ. But what I like to look at it is, Jesus just saying it. It says, "Therefore I urge you, imitate me." What did Jesus do that we should imitate? His whole life is, what we should imitate. But, like that quote said from the movie, total surrender. Even though Jesus said in the Garden of Gethsemane, He said, "Lord, let this cup pass over me if it is your will, but your will be done, not mine." That's what we really should do, in our walk with Jesus. Total surrender, but not willing to do what God wants our way, at our time. God's amazing grace is shown through our life, and He allows that to happen. We may not understand it, but we're supposed to imitate Him. We're supposed to let Him take complete control of our lives and do it on His time and not our own.
So as some of you are aware, I spent 3 months of this past summer as part of a government-sponsored research project in Japan to work at a university there. So I'm going to talk about what the Lord watched out for me in one particular situation while I was a stranger in a strange land over there. But before I talk about that, I'm just going to tell a little bit about the Adventist Church in Japan itself. So under the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, there are of course major divisions, like we're in the North American division of Seventh-day Adventists. Japan is under the Northern Asia Pacific division, which includes China and Korea, Mongolia, Taiwan. Each of those countries have their own individual divisions underneath that. Japan is under the Japan Union Conference, so I think this would be similar to like our Southern Union here that we're a part of. The Japan itself has about 190 churches over the whole country, over all of the 4 main islands and the small islands around. But only 15,000 members, so 15,000 members across the whole country, whereas here in the U.S. we have close to 1 million Seventh-day Adventists, or people who identify themselves as being members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So considerably smaller percentage, and I think that's actually the 66th country as far as number of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. So not a very large population of Seventh-day Adventists. Under the Japan Union Conference, there are a number of smaller conferences, like in the in the Southern Union we have like the Gulf States Conference, for example. Under the Japan Union Conference, the 3 main conferences are the East and West Japan Conference and the Okinawa Mission in southern Japan. So I was located around churches in the West Japan Conference. So Japan itself, of course, has 4 main islands. I was in the main island on the Honshu near the center in the Nara prefecture. And Nara is located about an hour by train from some of the major cities we're aware of here in the U.S., like Kyoto in the north, Osaka in the west, and Kobe is a little bit more west past Osaka by the coast, of course. So there's only 15,000 Seventh-day Adventists, but in terms of Christianity, only about 1% of the population actually identifies themselves as being Christian in Japan. 70% don't officially affiliate themselves with any particular religion, although from traveling around the countries, you can see the significant influence from like Buddhism and Shintoism, which are the primary 2 religions of the country. Particularly in Nara. So Nara is actually home to the largest wooden building in the world. So this is the largest structure made of wood in the world, and it's actually a Buddhist temple. So inside the largest wooden building in the world, there's actually the largest bronze Buddha statue inside. So this is kind of a unique Buddhist temple in that not only is there the Buddha inside, but around the statue, there's also a number of like figures representing some of the like pagan deities from the Shinto pantheon. So it's kind of a fusion of the two religions. Well, I don't think the Shinto influence was there originally. I think it kind of developed over time, and those were kind of put in in later centuries. In general, since there's only 1% of the population that identifies as being Christian, the vast majority of people don't really know much of anything about Christianity in general, and particularly the Bible. So they're fairly non-educated about the basic principles that we fairly take for granted here in the U.S. in particular, which was founded basically around Christianity. So a lot of the members face, in the stories that I was able to understand from the conversations I had with the members there and some of the churches, a lot of them faced a lot of social pressure when they decided to join a Christian church in general. So that's one of the main hindrances keeping back the growth of just Christianity in general in Japan. I was able to visit 3 churches while I was there during my 3 months. I primarily, of course, went to the Nara church where I was actually located, but I was able to visit the Kobe and Osaka Seventh-day Adventist churches as well. So this is the Kobe Seventh-day Adventist church. It is that the inside it's not as high of a ceiling as we have, but the inside is about as large as our church. And the week I was there was about 150 or 200 members. So considering there's only 15,000 total Seventh-day Adventists, this is actually a fairly large congregation for the country. And that was just on an average week. So one of the main reasons that there's actually such a large membership at this particular church is because they're located next to, and a lot of the members work at the Kobe Adventist Hospital. So this is one of 3 Adventist hospitals in Japan. The other 2 are in Tokyo, and the other one I believe is in Okinawa, I believe. So I don't have any pictures of the Osaka church, but it's similar in membership to the Kobe church, but they have a large number of foreign nationals, so non-Japanese citizens. They have an English service. So for 1 week, I was able to enjoy an English sermon, as opposed to the other weeks where it was mostly unintelligible for me, obviously, it was in Japanese. But most of the time, I was at the Nara Seventh-day Adventist Church. So just kind of like a side testimony, for there only being 15,000 Adventists, it was providential that the university that I happened to be doing the research at was close by an Adventist church. It's not a very large Adventist church. It's very modest, about the size of Quitman, I would presume. I would say capacity, it would probably hold maybe 50, maybe 40 to 50 members total, like if it was full inside the building. But there were much smaller people than we are, so maybe not as many Americans. But on the average week, about 20 or 25 members were usually in attendance. And every church I attended, after all the services, they would always eat together. At the Osaka church, they would just have like bread and jelly, which was kind of an odd thing. But I think in Japan, that's not a normal thing they would themselves choose to eat. So I think it was kind of like a special thing for them there. Whereas for us, it would be odd. But they would eat after every service, and they would sing songs in Japanese, of course. And the Nara Church is particularly representative of one of the problems facing the growth of the church, but Japan actually as a whole, and that is the growing aged population. So over 90% of the members of the Nara Church are retired, so 65 or older, and most of the people, particularly in this particular image, even though they look very, very good for their age, are in their late 70s or early 80s in this particular photo. The Nara Church actually is without a pastor, and some of the other churches actually, I think the Kobe Church as well, was kind of in flux with like transitioning between pastors, mostly because a lot of the pastors are retiring themselves, and so there's not a lot of influx to get new pastors there. So it's kind of a problem they're facing there in Japan. So this lady here, to my right in the photo, to my left, the way I'm facing in the photo, used to be an English teacher before she retired. So she kind of took the role of, after the service, kind of giving me the general rundown on what they actually said during the sermon. We're without a pastor, so most of the time they would have a guest speaker come in from a surrounding area. And 2 weeks they actually just showed a video from like a satellite video. And sometimes when they showed on the screen, like the text, I could pick up like what the Bible text they're trying to get at. But most of the time, it was just kind of waiting for her to tell me what what they were talking about. My actual testimony involves another member that you can't see. They're not in this particular photo, but they spoke English very well. Most of all of the other members, other than this particular lady, weren't really at a conversational level, so it was really, fairly difficult to communicate with. There was one other member who was Indonesian. He wasn't actually Japanese, and they spoke English quite well. So they were usually the mediator between any conversation I was having. So this couple here, the man on the right and his wife on the left, and that's their daughter there next to the wife, and her two children, so they're the twin grandchildren of the people on the side. One Sabbath, invited me over to their house the following Sunday for like lunch and to talk. So I of course agreed to do so, of course, because they don't obviously get a lot of Americans, so to talk to. And I hadn't been in a lot of Japanese homes, so I figured it was a good situation for both of us for like a cultural exchange. So we had agreed upon, so they figured it would be easier to meet somewhere and then travel on to their house for direction-wise. So they had given me directions to meet them at an elementary school in a field. So they had told me to meet them in a field behind the elementary school, okay? So I said, okay, of course, I obviously would. So the next day, I don't have any pictures of the trip, obviously. So the next day, I took the train out to where they had said and tried to make my way to the elementary school. So one thing to note in Japan is, unlike here, they don't have street signs. So like we would have signs as we're driving along the streets. Most in the suburban areas, there are no labels for the streets. So it's a little difficult to navigate in the downtown areas. But luckily, getting like landmark cues of convenience stores and things around, it's possible to get through. So I made my way to what I presumed was the elementary school. There was no sign in English, obviously, that told me the name of the school. There may have been a sign there that said it was the school, but I, of course, couldn't read the sign. But the main thing was there was no field. There was no field by the school. So I wasn't sure if that was the correct location or not. There was a park beside the school, so I presumed that they meant to meet them in the park. Like maybe that was the field area. So I went over to the park and waited. I was a little bit early, and the Japanese are usually very punctual, so I presumed they would just show up at like exactly the time they said they would show up. That's usually how they do, but somehow. So I waited. It started to rain a little bit, as it usually did there in the summertime, but I had brought an umbrella, so I was fine. So I waited, and then the meeting time came, of course, and then the meeting time passed, and I was expecting them to show up because they usually show up like exactly on time, but they didn't show up. So I waited a little longer, maybe 10 minutes or so. And I thought maybe they were in a different part of the park. So I walked around and looked for them. And of course, there were other people in the park, but I didn't, presume they would know the people I was looking for. As we would notice random people on the street, obviously. Yeah. And I wasn't trying to ask them if they knew the people anyway. So I just continued to walk around looking for the couple. So about 20 minutes after the time, I was getting a little anxious as to how I would find the people. Okay, because obviously I had no way to call them. So the phone doesn't work in Japan. AT&T doesn't have coverage, obviously on the island of Japan. I did have a Wi-Fi hotspot, so I could do messaging, like messaging programs, like Skype and whatnot, that can do instant messaging. But I didn't have their contact information. They were an older couple, so they weren't really into that thing. So I didn't have any contact information for them to get a hold of them. So I wasn't really sure how I would get to where I was supposed to be, obviously. So I started walking back to the train station because there was a bridge there where I could get under to get out of the rain while I tried to figure out what I was going to do. So while I was under the bridge, I decided to pray, and I just said, Lord, if you could send an angel to guide me to this people, that would be great. I'd appreciate it if you could do that, because I didn't have any way of obviously finding out where they would be, other than just aimlessly walking around hoping that I may stumble upon the correct location. I did not do that. I did not just aimlessly walk around because I didn't want to get lost myself and not be able to get back to the train station, because I wouldn't be able to ask. I could probably have drawn a picture of a train and asked someone where the train station was and easily gotten back to the train station, but I obviously didn't want to get too lost. So I kind of waited, and I had almost decided to just go back to the training, just go back home, and try to explain to the people the next week that what had happened. I couldn't find them. When I had gotten just a random message from the Indonesian church member, just asking me what my plans were for that Sunday, because I was a foreigner, what sites I was going to see, and what I was going to do that day. So I obviously replied back to them the situation, that I wasn't sure where I was and where I was supposed to go, and if they could contact the Japanese couple and help me find them. So they of course were able to do so, and using the messages, they were able to guide me to where they're supposed to be. So it turns out that school, or what I thought was a school, wasn't actually correct, but I was supposed to meet them in a parking lot, on the other side of the school. So this is a parking lot like ours, where it's paved, and there's no grass, and it's not a field, as we would say a field. So it was more just like a mistranslation, obviously, of them trying to tell me just meet them in the lot, like behind the school. So obviously, while I was being guided back, I of course realized that the Lord had answered my prayer and guided me to them. So I thanked Him. A few days later, I was thinking about it more, and some verses came to mind, like Psalm 86:7. So in the day of my trouble, I will call upon you, for you will answer me. And Psalm 116:1 and 2, I love the Lord, because He has heard my voice, because He has inclined His ear to me. Therefore, I will call upon Him as long as I live. I thought about it more over the next coming weeks, and then it occurred to me that he had answered my prayer to guide me to the people, but I had also asked for an angel to guide me to the people, and he had just used a church member to do so. So some other verses that came to mind were like 1 Corinthians 3:9, for we are God's fellow workers, you are God's field, you are God's building. Philippians 2:13, for it is God which worketh in you, both to will and to do of His good pleasure. Galatians 6:10, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. So that really resonated with me, and kind of stayed with me above all the other experiences I had. And obviously there were lots of situations where providential circumstances, watched out for me and guided me to where I needed to be in different locations at certain times. But this one in particular resonated with me. And I think it's important for us all to remember that we are, God's angels, His messengers here, and it is our responsibility to be mindful of the situations and to do what is right in all of the situations we face on a regular basis.